Welcome back, everyone. This is RangeMaster Rob Allen again with another one of our interviews with medical professionals who are doing interesting things. And today we've got one that I've been looking forward to. Caitlin McGee is with us from Washington, D.C. And Caitlin is a physical therapist who specializes in helping with esports players and helping them both avoid injury and then rehabilitate from injury. And I think from things I've watched, you also attend some of these events and help on site.
We do. Sometimes we run a community health booth. Sometimes we're backstage helping players prep for playoffs.
Well, that's really fascinating. But let's back up a little bit. I'm 70. You look a lot younger than me. Would you mind sharing your age?
Sure, I'm 30.
You're 30, and I have to ask, are you an avid player yourself?
Oh gosh, yes.
Okay, and I think the appropriate question is, where do you spend most of your time in esport gaming? What do you have favorites?
I do. So the first game that I learned to play competitively really was a game called Dota 2, Defense of the Ancients. It's kind of like a 5v5 capture the base type game. There's about 114-ish different characters you can pick from. Any team is only composed of 5 of them. You can ban some of them out, so there's strategy involved. It was probably one of the higher strategy games I could have picked to get my start in esports, certainly. But I play that. I also play an MMO, a massive multiplayer online game called Guild Wars 2. It's kind of like World of Warcraft, which most people have heard of. I play some other just fun party type games. There's a game called Among Us where you're a bunch of characters on a spaceship and someone is killing off members of your spaceship and you have to figure out who it is. So it's like a deductive game. But I play a little bit of everything, mostly because I at least want to have some experience with any game that players I work with and treat play. So I've touched CSGO and Valorant and Overwatch. I've touched League of Legends, even though there's a massive rivalry between Dota and League of Legends. It's historic and storied. But I'd say probably my favorites would really be Guild Wars 2 and Dota 2.
Well, we have about between 17,000 and 20,000 people that are active medical professionals that are on our newsletter, and we attach these interviews to that newsletter. So keeping that in mind, why don't we dial back and say, where'd you go to high school?
Let's see, I went to high school at a very small all-girls Catholic school called Gwynedd Mercy Academy that shared a campus with the college of the same name.
And what city was that?
That's in Gwynedd Valley, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And you're in Washington, D.C. now. Is that very far away?
It's a bit of a hike. I ended up down here after grad school and loved it.
Did you start knowing in high school that you were going to be a physical therapist, or how did that evolve?
So I knew as of about high school that I wanted to do something in the medical field. My interest was definitely not surgery. That was not where my interest lay. I went through a bunch of physical therapy myself. I was an athlete, so certainly injured myself enough times to require some physical therapy. I liked physical therapy. I liked occupational therapy. I was really interested in biomedical engineering, designing prosthetics, research on orthotics. For a while, I thought I might want to go into the research only side of things. And really it was college when I started narrowing down a bit more that it was definitely PT that I wanted to put my energy towards. So
15 years ago, certainly people were playing video games, but you said you were a high school athlete. What were your activities?
I played soccer and I ran track. Specifically, I ran hurdles, 100 hurdles, 400 hurdles. I later went on to also run the 800 and the steeplechase in college.
Ah, so you were a college athlete as well.
Yes.
Were you a video game player in high school?
I was, to a much lesser extent than I am as an adult, in large part because, it turns out when you're a 3-sport athlete, you don't have all that much spare time. Mm-hmm. But at that point, most of what I was playing was Zelda. The Ocarina of Time was the first game I ever played. That and a whole bunch of Oregon Trail, which who among us in my generation has not played a lot of Oregon Trail? At this point, we're all traumatized by cholera and river crossings.
I think that was mandatory, like in about the third grade, was it not?
Oh, I just remember we had these. We had the Apple Macs that had like the different like colored backgrounds or like the colored frames. I remember playing a lot of Oregon Trail on that, and also Zumbini's Logical Adventure, which was another educational type game, like puzzle solver.
I need to help you a little bit. Out west, we call it Oregon, not Oregon. But nonetheless, I'll forgive that.
Hey, us Northeasters have weird pronunciations of things like coffee and talking too, so it's fine.
I couldn't help it. It was just all right. So then you move on to the university. You did your undergraduate work where?
I went to undergrad at another very small school, Ursinus. It's a small D3 liberal arts college up in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. The biggest nearby thing is the King of Prussia Mall, which second largest mall in America. It goes back and forth with, the one in Minneapolis for the actual biggest mall in America.
I see. Okay. And then sometime in college, what was your undergrad degree in?
So I double majored. I had a double major in neuroscience and exercise and sports science.
Oh, neuroscience. It's going to be interesting to talk to you.
I like brains. Yes. Brains are great.
The Final Frontier is my, that's my moniker for that. And then, so you decide then you're going to go on to PT school. Did you go right away?
I did, yes. I finished my undergrad degree in May. I started PT school in July.
Oh gosh. And again, say the name of your PT school and its city.
I went to the illustrious University of Delaware in Newark, Delaware, not to be mistaken with Newark, New Jersey, which is only one syllable, despite the fact that they're spelled the same way.
I've been to Newark, Delaware. Someone from Spokane, Washington doesn't always make it there, but several famous people are from Delaware. All right. So now you're off into physical therapy school. And I believe you have a PhD in physical therapy.
I do not know. I just have my DPT.
Okay. You have a DPT in physical therapy. And at some point, when you graduate, you take your first job. Tell us about that a little bit.
So my very first job, I knew I actually didn't want to do outpatient orthopedics to start with. I wanted to go somewhere that had like a really good teaching reputation where I'd be able to continue growing as a PT and as a medical professional in general. So I took a job at a hospital in Arlington, Virginia Hospital Center, which remains an absolutely fantastic choice. It's one of my favorite places to have worked. I had a really great experience working there, and I got to see quite a bit in the acute care setting. So we rotated every 3 months between different units. So we'd work on the joint replacement unit. We'd work in the ICU. We'd work in the emergency department. We'd work on cardiac rehab units. We'd work on the cardiac step down unit. So we did a little bit of everything, and you got to learn quite a bit along the way.
So you continue along your journey, but at some point you must have had an intersection with people who are playing video games and starting to experience some pain.
So I actually got into esports, kind of just health generally, because at that point we didn't have any name for it other than just medical professional who does video game things. Right around the same time I was finishing my final clinical rotation, still as a student. I was doing my clinical rotation. I was studying for boards. I was training for a marathon, and I was writing ergonomics guides for players because I'd started playing Dota and Guild Wars and loved them, and started seeing people with really terrible posture. And I was like, I can help fix that thing. And at the time, it was very much just basic, straightforward ergonomics. Here's things you can do to adjust your setup. Here's, basic exercises you can do as warm up and cool down. And then as I started working my full-time job at the hospital, I continued to do that kind of ergonomics guides, continued chatting with players and with coaches. And I was also doing statistics actually for Dota 2. I was doing like in-game statistical analyses and providing them to the commentators. So that was really kind of my on-ramp to esports was twofold, but I did eventually hit a point where I could either really do the statistics thing or I could do the esports PT thing, and I wasn't going to have time for both. And I picked my first love, which was PT.
Interesting. I have 20 questions, but I can only ask one at a time. But we should pause right here. You now have your own company.
I do.
I believe it's called 1HP.
Yes.
So explain 1HP, and then let's talk about the difference when I say video games and you say esports. So
sure.
First,
so 1HP is a company that I co-own with Matt Wu, who is also a physical therapist. He's based out of California. And he and I have been working together since 2017 at this point. We both really have kind of the same approach to treating players, to using evidence, to learning more about what we do, to developing research. And so it's been really fantastic to collaborate with him. And our team actually has grown a little bit since then. So we've now got 5 PTs, 2 clinical psychologists, and a chiropractor on our team. And I did not expect to be working with a chiropractor and actually getting along well with him, but here we are. He's a fantastic individual, though. Really appreciate how he approaches medicine as well. So 1HP is a reference to the concept of hit points or health points in games. So if you're not an avid video game player, your character's lifespan, basically the amount of health they have before they die, is measured in hit points or health points generally. So when you're getting down to just 1 hit point, you are almost dead. And our goal at 1HP is to catch people before they get to just 1 hit point left.
Got that. And then to my question, people in my generation would lump this into video games. Mm-hmm. What differentiates video games from esports?
It's a really interesting question because there's a lot of esports titles or games that are played as competitive esports that are also just played casually and for fun. Like I've mentioned, I played Dota 2. I don't play it in a competitive way. I play it for fun. I play it with friends, but I'm not competing for money when I do that. So esports require video games. All esports are also video games. But esports specifically refers to organized competition, to some kind of structure being in place, and to playing for some amount of money. And sometimes it's small local tournaments called LAN tournaments that you play for like $50 for first place. And sometimes it's things like the International, which is a Dota 2 tournament that happens every year. It's kind of like the World Cup of Dota. The prize pool for the 2021 International will be $41 million to be divided among the 16 teams that make it there.
$41 million?
Yes. And some of that is crowdfunded, and some of that comes from the organizing, the company that owns the game, Valve.
So there's obviously big audiences and advertising revenue then.
Very much so. But really when it comes to what is esports for a physical therapist, we like summarizing it as a static endurance sport that tests cognitive function in a virtual environment. It sums up pretty well the fact that you're maintaining a posture sitting there statically, that it requires precise, quick, repetitive movements of the hands, that there's an endurance component to it because you must maintain that position, that a whole bunch of it is going on up here and not so much in here, mm-hmm. And that you are tested in a virtual, not physical so much environment.
Well, so a bunch of things. It's fun, interesting to me that we have this conversation on a day when the national government in China just put severe restrictions.
Very severe restrictions, yes.
On how much time, what is it, 3 hours a week?
3 hours a week.
And 30 minutes a night, if it's not, I think Friday nights, and then you can do the rest on the weekend or something like that.
Right. You're allowed to do an hour if it's on a Friday or a Saturday. You're only allowed 30 minutes if it's a school night, basically.
Well, those of us in medical related fields would like to think they're doing that so everyone stays physically healthy, but I don't think that's really their motivation.
Given all of the context surrounding that particular decision, I don't think it's just about that. No.
Well, having said that, it's still, you've drifted over into a discussion about outcomes, mm-hmm. and you talk about evidence-based medicine, but when I think about outcomes, I kind of have a dual mindset here. One is sort of the statistical measurements that we try to make in physical therapy to get some sense of progress. But the other outcome, and I might equate it to like an American football player, how fast can he run the 40-yard dash, right? That's a performance kind of outcome. So let's talk about outcomes on both sides, because I think those therapists, physical, occupational, athletic trainers are going to have to deal with both hemispheres here.
Absolutely.
In that conversation. What do you think about that? What are your thought processes?
So I think right now in esports, we've got a really good opportunity to do a whole bunch of research and establish the groundwork here, which is a very nice way of saying we have very little research right now and someone should fund more of it. And actually both of the research publications I've had so far, one in Frontiers and one that actually will come out tomorrow, September 1st in JOSPT,
Nice.
are on that specific idea that we need more research right now. Right now, the evidence that we use for esports is primarily borrowed. So we borrow from principles of health and performance in traditional sports, unsurprisingly. But traditional sports are not, esports is not just traditional sports, but less movement. Esports is also similar to chess. It's similar to working as an air traffic controller, sitting still for hours with a cognitively demanding task. We can draw from third shift workers because esports are often played across multiple time zones. So someone playing on the West Coast might be playing on West Coast time. We draw from, athletic training. We draw from traditional sports. We draw from chess. We draw from air traffic control. We draw from third shift workers. We draw from performers, from musicians, because a lot of times esports isn't just done in isolation. It's streamed, it's broadcast for people to watch. A lot of the esports competitors are also streamers. They stream their casual or non-competitive video games on websites like Twitch for fun, for audiences, for engagement. So they're performers as well as athletes. And in that regard, we also draw from research in professional wrestling, like the WWE, which really is a mix of sports and entertainment more than anything else. And it's probably not all that surprising that a lot of esports fans are also big fans of competitive wrestling, or professional wrestling rather. So the downside of all of this.
You sound like a doubter there, but just keep going.
Well, I was going to say the downside of all of this is this research that we draw on, as great as it is, it's not esports specific. We don't have much esports specific research. We need prevalence data on injuries. We need research on the impact of caffeine on performance, of other supplements on performance, on what supplements should be considered banned because they provide too much of a competitive benefit. We need to look at things like the effects of sleep on performance. We need to know, how does ergonomic positioning affect pain? How does pain reflect pathology? Does it reflect pathology? How common is carpal tunnel really in gamers? And anecdotally, I can tell you it's not very common. Most of what we see is tendinopathy. There's like no carpal tunnel. But we can't prove that because we haven't done the studies to say that, yes, we can definitively state this is the case, which is a really huge barrier when it comes to presenting what's going on in esports to mainstream medical institutions. We simply don't have the data. We have anecdotes, and the plural of anecdote is not data. We need the research done so that we can definitively say these things benefit players. These things cause them risks to their health. Here's how gaming can be a part of a healthy and holistic lifestyle. And because of our limitations in research right now, a lot of what we're saying is not as thoroughly and scientifically backed as we would like it to be.
Yeah, although I thought your use of the DASH study in your early video was an interesting application. I think it was a 50-some-year-old woman who was basically, you were talking about her activities of daily living and the pain she was experiencing. And then relative to the trapezius, I think trying to resolve some, what you referred to as tennis elbow. But still, the use of the DASH study there sounded like it was a good way to blend sort of anecdotal reporting over time to, to an outcome that might be meaningful. I mean, if pain is an interruption for a video game player, that you'd have to assume they're not playing at their top
right
level.
Well, we'd reasonably assume that, but you're right, we don't have the data to say are they able to push through it or not.
Yeah.
And yes, absolutely, using outcome measures like the dash, like the pen even, because we do have some shoulder pain patients. Those are really helpful ways of starting to quantify a subjective experience. And over time, being able to build more of a database. As of right now, most of our database is our own documentation and how commonly we're seeing certain diagnoses pop up.
Mm-hmm. Are there any really early studies? What have you published early work on any data collection?
So we reference what we've found in our Frontiers article, specifically about tendinopathies in esports and video games. With the caveat that, of course, we're basing this off of our clinical practice rather than based off established studies. There are some studies starting to come out. There's a couple studies out of NYIT that have looked at the locations of pain. So not necessarily a diagnosed pathology, but here are the pain patterns. Here are the regions where we're having players experience pain most commonly, which, to be clear, is not always just the hands. A lot of times it's necks and backs too.
Sure. Yeah. I know you've had some discussion about posture there, but let's pause for a second. I believe you've written a document about exercises for video gamers, isn't it?
I've written several.
And could you tell me a little bit about where our viewers could go to tap into that?
Oh, sure. So we have two really great resources for general hand and wrist pain, whether written or video format. And some of these are gaming specific, and some of these are generally applicable to anybody with hand issues, musicians, rock climbers, etc. So we have our website, which is 1-hp.org. We have a whole blog section that's just all about things we've observed. We write up case studies there. We talk about kind of the pain patterns we see most commonly. And then we've similarly got on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/1hporg. So it looks like 1hporg is where we keep all of our videos. And we specifically have a couple playlists that we've put together of hand and wrist pain patterns that we see and the exercises we most commonly use to prevent them.
Do you have anything for sale, Caitlin? I'm asking you to give yourself a shameless plug here.
Oh, we sell consultant services, I suppose. So there's a bunch of things that we do that's paid. Through 1HP, we do provide services to teams, obviously, but we also do education for organizations, for schools, for communities, and for medical professionals. So we've gone in and worked with colleges' athletic training departments when they're setting up their first esports program. So we're more than happy to help kind of make it a sustainable initiative, especially for schools, and to train the trainers. We absolutely go and do educational seminars for teams, again, for organizations and for clinics about the kinds of injuries they'll see most commonly, about how to address some of those injuries they see most commonly, as well as kind of developing a network of medical professionals who have some experience in esports. So we're definitely available to consult on those kinds of things.
I know a lot of physical therapists who are into sports performance target their marketing toward parents. Can you talk about parents in esports?
Sure. So one of the really great things that we've gotten to do over the past year is to work with an organization called COPE, which is the Coalition of Parents in Esports. And it's specifically for parents whose kids want to go professional in esports or want to become professional streamers. And talking about kind of the balance of school and work functionally. It's really, really important when we're working with parents to be making it clear that part of this is still on parents to build a healthy lifestyle around gaming. And part of this is on organizations and especially community organizations existing to support those same initiatives. So, if you wanted to play soccer, if you wanted to go professional in soccer, you'd probably play on your intramural team for a while, and then maybe you'd try out for a travel team. You'd probably also play for your school. You'd have all of these places where you're getting support in how to be a competitive soccer player. and at the same time, be learning about teamwork and communication and leadership as a consequence of that. In esports, a lot of folks who've gotten to the top didn't have that kind of organization or support to get there in the first place. So I think it's really great for parents whose kids are interested in esports to be reaching out to their local schools, to be reaching out to, their local YMCA, other community organizations, and saying, hey, can we have an esports club? Can we have somebody organizing this? Can we have a coach who's interested and invested in helping these players develop? Because there are lots of resources, plenty of us here online who exist in esports who are more than happy to help with that kind of thing. There's COPE, there's NASEF, which is the National Association of Scholastic Esports Federation, something like that. There's the High School Esports League, there's Play Versus, there's EGF, the Electronic Gaming Federation. All of those are involved in helping schools and communities set up sustainable and healthy esports programs, and to have coaches who are invested in those players, not just being good at the game, but also building all those other kind of soft skills that you'd learn along with becoming a soccer player, becoming a baseball player.
I think I heard you say you also have a psychologist in your group now.
We have 3 technically.
Now, I anecdotally heard in one of our interviews that esports players may have come through the pandemic a little healthier mentally because they had a close group of people they played with, and it became their social network. Can you comment on that?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. So yes, definitely. Pretty much all of us who play video games exist to some extent online and have built friend networks online. Part of how I stayed sane was I played D&D virtually with friends. And I think definitely having, some established network online really did help. At the same time, one of the really great things about esports is to go to an event in person, to see these people you don't always get to see, to get the stereotypical esports meal of going out to Korean barbecue. I don't know why it's a stereotype, but it is, and it's true. To see your friends, to cheer for people that you love watching, to really be able to engage with all of this. It's something that was very much missed. And I think players have really missed out on that in-person community as well, because esports as an industry grew out of in-person connections. It was very grassroots at the beginning, and a lot of esports scenes still are. Most notably the fighting games community. So Street Fighter, Tekken, Super Smash Brothers. Those games are still very much in-person based. And so it's definitely not the same to be playing them online only and not being able to see your friend groups. But for sure, having an established online network really did help a lot of us who work in video games feel at least marginally less not sane during the pandemic. We'll go with that.
I think we can go with that, because it was easy. It was definitely been easy to feel insane from time to time.
I'll say.
Yeah. Hey, let's just, I'm going to wander out to the very edge of space here and ask you this question, because you mentioned the Korean food. Esports, or at least video gaming, is really an international phenomenon. Absolutely. And we've interviewed people, in Eastern Europe about this work. Do you think there's any potential here that some barriers to international relations could spring up out of all these young people having this worldwide kind of?
So it's interesting. On the one hand, it is definitely crossing boundaries, and players are, engaging people from other communities. On the other hand, you do get some of the same tribalism that you get in traditional sports. So for example, in the US, for Dota, there's servers on the East Coast and on the West Coast. A lot of times the servers on the East Coast are better maintained than some of the servers in regions of South America. So a lot of times we'll have South and Central American players playing on East Coast servers. And there's definitely been issues of racism on the part of the North American players, talking about what are these players from Peru doing on my servers, or, insulting that they use Spanish primarily. Same thing happens in Europe with Russian players on European servers. And even about 2 years back, there was a borderline international incident because a player from the Philippines made a derogatory remark about a Chinese player. And the Chinese government, which was hosting the next major tournament in Shanghai for Dota 2, said that that player would be banned and would not be allowed into China if he tried to arrive with his team. So on the one hand, yes, players are definitely connecting across borders. On the other hand, if there's one thing humans are really, really good at, it's getting tribal and shutting other people out. And we haven't quite managed to overcome that in esports by any stretch of the imagination.
Very interesting answer and a good observation. There's always hope, right?
There is.
There's always hope. And I've heard similar anecdotal stories about male versus female players.
There is. There are definitely issues, improving issues of sexism in esports, as there have been throughout any traditional sports as well. Mm-hmm. At this point, women make up about 46% of the gaming population. That's just casual, non-competitive gaming population. But plenty of us do play competitively as well. Things have definitely improved even since the time that I started working in esports, which was just 6 years ago. There are definitely gendered terms and gendered slurs, which are used with far less frequency than they used to be. They're still used, and there definitely still is a bias by some players. There are also more and more folks, though, who are comfortable and willing to both speak up about it after the fact and to confront it in the moment, which I think is a fairly universal thing, not just an esports thing, mm-hmm. but I am really happy to see it in video gaming and esports. And one of the great things, again, about online networks is there are networks of female gamers, of female competitors who are able then to support each other and to play together and to build each other up. So definitely there's room for us to keep growing. But I think that's true of the whole human race. And I've been really gratified to see the improvement in esports even over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, good. Well, let's, I have one other question before we kind of move on. But this whole phenomenon of playing esports in college, you referenced college teams. Mm-hmm. I think I've heard at least one reference about scholarships to play video games. As a grandparent, that's jarring to me, because I think there was an early bias on our part as adults. Other than Oregon Trail, you were just wasting time, right? Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing across the scholarship college team environment and coaching and physical therapy involvement.
So one of the interesting things to watch right now with colleges is there isn't kind of a universal consensus on where an esports team fits in a college program. Some colleges are starting esports teams under the heading of their athletics department. Some schools are starting an esports team under the heading of like their residence life, kind of fun mm-hmm. culture department. Some schools are hiring coaches. Some schools are asking someone who already works at the school to volunteer as the coach. Some schools want a coach who is also like a team manager and arranges all the scrimmaging schedules and also does all the recruiting and basically does a job about 3 different people and doesn't get paid for it. Mm-hmm. Some schools are, incorporating their esports team and then saying, okay, what departments do we have that it would make sense to get involved in this? Let's talk to our students in the medical professions. Let's involve our students in broadcast journalism. Let's see about bringing in, some of our radio show hosts that we have on the college and seeing if they can work on the broadcast side of things. What about our visual engineering folks? Can they be involved in this? And I love those schools in particular because they're making the esports an integrated part of their whole college experience. The NCAA has declined to include esports under the header of athletics, which on the one hand kind of sucks because it means that they aren't getting, kind of that validity, I suppose, that a lot of people attribute to the NCAA. On the other hand, we're also not then bound by a lot of the strictures of the NCAA, which, as anyone who's ever been involved in college athletics can tell you, is not always, the best of times. So it's really great to see that esports programs are able to develop on their own. I think the really important thing that schools should keep in mind when it comes to collegiate athletics development, especially involving esports in that, is whether you put it under your athletics department or not, whether you put it under Res Life or not, there isn't a set structure right now. No one has a blueprint for this. We are all making the blueprints as we go along. So you have an opportunity to do something different, to avoid mistakes of other departments, to set this up in a way that's sustainable, not only for the players, but also for you as a collegiate institution, for whoever's managing it and running it. So don't assume that you have to fit any particular model, because there isn't a model right now. Spoilers, we're all making this up as we go along, because esports hasn't been around long enough for anyone to say this is the best way to do it. So you get a chance to develop the best way to do it. Don't feel as though you have to be bound to the way things have been done previously.
Caitlin McGee, you certainly turned out to be an interesting interview. Whoever told me about you was right on the money. Let's put the contact information out again. Sure. Could you just repeat how folks might?
Absolutely. If they want to check out our website, it's one-hp.org. If they'd like to check out our YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/1hporg. And if they'd like to reach out to me directly, I can be found on Twitter at Kate McGee PT, pretty easy to find. On my Twitter, I've also got access to my my email address, as well as my research page. And folks can read the research there. They can also check out the textbook that I co-wrote, which is the Handbook of Esports Medicine. It's currently the only clinical textbook on esports injuries.
Where can you buy that on Amazon?
You can actually, it's sold out on Amazon currently. They can probably get it most reliably through Springer, which is the publisher.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time today. And I hope we have opportunities to visit again in the future.
All right. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
All right. Bye-bye.